Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Thanks for checking it out if you're new. Dune has kind of taken over the recent cultural zeitgeist with both the 2021 film and now 2024's Dune Part 2. I have fallen in love with the two Dune films. They were for a while my only experience with Dune. I had watched Dune 2021 opening night with a friend and went and saw it 2 more times in theaters. And I debated venturing into the other Dune adaptations and the book, but I decided to wait because I didn't want to spoil Dune Part 2 for myself. So after the long writer's strike of 2023, where studios refused to pay their talent fairly, Dune Part 2 got delayed to this year. And now, after I've seen Dune Part 2 now 4 times, I have read Dune in its entirety, and I just wanted to talk about it with you guys today. So, if you don't know, Dune is a novel from the 1960s. It is arguably the sci-fi novel, and you can tell that Star Wars was definitely influenced by this and inspired by it, and that's not a bad thing. Taking inspiration from things is not bad. Look at The Lion King. The Lion King takes inspiration from and is an adaptation of Hamlet. And everybody loves The Lion King. So these are going to be some of my rambling thoughts. I've got a list of bullet points here. They're in a slight order of as I was going through the book. I was making notes. But I might jump around. And let's just talk about Dune. Right off the bat, a formatting issue I wanted to talk about is that you might notice this is a small copy of Dune. This is I believe it's the mass paperback, they say, where they print millions and millions of these, and, this is like $10 versus the larger one would be like $18 to $20. And so I got this because it was on sale with the other 2 of the initial Dune trilogy. And I have to tell you, this is probably the worst way you could read this book. Because it is so small, and as you can see, it's not a short book. The book is physically so small in this format that it becomes incredibly hard to read, some of the inside text as it kind of ventures into the spine. You really got to pull it apart, which then breaks the spine of the book. And so if you've never read the book before, I would definitely say go get it in the larger format, because this was less than ideal. Okay, with that out of the way, to quickly summarize Dune, if you've never read it or heard about it, it's kind of like Space Game of Thrones. It is the story of the Atreides family as they acquire the planet Arrakis. And on this planet is the essential mineral known as spice that the galaxy all uses. Arrakis is the only place that spice is grown, so everyone wants their hands on Arrakis. And so it becomes the political intrigue and infighting over this planet as these different royal families go to war over it. And so some quick non-spoiler thoughts is I really like the book. I think it's a quick read, at least for me. It's not necessarily the most action-packed book. Don't expect to go in and it be like, whoa, these crazy battles. No. It is a lot of 2 characters sitting, talking to one another, and then the battles are usually quickly summarized, in a page or 2, which can be a little disappointing at times, but overall, I do really enjoy the book. And if you're at all interested in sci-fi, check it out. And I know the length can be intimidating, but I do think it's a pretty easy breezy read, You kind of get into it and you just keep going and going, and the next thing you know, you're like, wow, I'm halfway through the book. If you're curious because you've seen the movies on how it's broken up, I would say that Dune Part 1 is about the first 2/3 of the book, and then the last third is what they used for Dune Part 2, if that gives you any perspective into the length/pacing of it. But yeah, so let's just jump right into it. I can't really talk about this book without using spoilers, so if you haven't read the book and you're interested, now's your chance. Get out of here, leave, go away, come back once you've read it. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. So the first thing that really stood out to me with Dune was the perspective, the point of view, in that the book is written in third person omniscient. So this means that we can go around and it's almost like someone is reading the book for us, like an unseen narrator, where like they might say, Paul walked over to the table and picked up the knife. But then we also go inside Paul's head and, Paul's, which knife will I pick? We hear his thoughts. And I was really caught off guard by that change because I felt like it eliminated some of the surprises that are in the movies. Like, for example, Dr. Yue's betrayal in Dune Part 1 is a big twist in the movie. You're like, Versus in the book, we literally go into the Baron's head where he's sitting there talking to Peter and he's thinking, like, yes, I have contracted Dr. Yue to betray the Atreides. He will lower the shield wall and we will attack at blah, blah, blah. And I was just like, whoa, that's like the twist of Dune Part 1. The movie versus here in the first 15 pages. I just read it. And so I do think it's interesting. And I do see where the movie would have had the challenge of having to adapt this because it can be hard. In the book, we spend so much time in everyone's head versus in the movie, they had the challenge of they had to have these characters express these thoughts either visually on their face or through dialogue. Overall, I would say the Dune Part 1, the movie, is fairly accurate to the first 2/3 of the book. It's almost incredible how accurate it is, but the movie did simplify things. Like, I do think the book has a lot of, because this character knows this character has to say it. For example, in the movie, there's the combat training scene with Gurney, where Gurney explains, like, the never sit with your back to the wall. They talk about Arrakis, and the two of them then fight. In the book, it plays out a little differently. For example, in the book, Thufir has the I recognized your footsteps, old man moment with Paul. Then Jessica comes in and talks about how dangerous Arrakis is. And then Gurney comes in and starts singing, which wasn't in the movie either. Gurney is actually pretty funny in the book, I feel, versus he's not that funny in the movie. And so then Gurney starts singing and dancing, and Paul's like, okay, if I fight you, will you shut up? And so seeing that scene play out with all those, kind of, okay, my turn, was a little weird. That being said, there is a lot of stuff that was cut from the books into the movie. Like, for example, there's the whole dinner party sequence. This is where Jessica and Leto invite the, main players of Arrakis, so to say. Your water traders, your shop owners, things like that. And they invite all these individuals to come to their home and have dinner and kind of establish alliances and loyalties with each other. And that scene, I think, is really good. It's really fun. It gives Jessica a lot of time to flesh out her character and see her motivations and point of view in all this. Versus, she is prominent in the movie, but she's not as prominent, I would say, as she is in the first half of the book. They almost kind of flip-flopped her roles in the movies. In the movie, she's very prominent in part 2, versus in the book, she's very prominent in the first half. Bouncing off that dinner party, I think the world building in this book is really incredible. Because it is all made up words like Kwisatz Haderach and Muad'Dib and things like that. But the book does explain them well, both in the book's natural dialogue, as well as in the back of the book there is a glossary that gives you a definition of all these made up words. But yeah, the first half of the book is almost identical to the movie, minus they do leave out. In the book, they know there is a traitor among them. The Harkonnens kind of leave that, note to then turn the Atreides against each other. So the Atreides know there's a traitor amongst them, but they don't know who it is. People suspect it might be Jessica, or maybe it's Paul, or maybe it's Gurney, and so forth. Everybody is suspecting each other. For them, it's almost the murder mystery, who done it, who is the traitor, among us. But in the movie, that's not there, and I do wish it had been, because it would have really given a unique perspective to that. Because, for example, in the movie, then when they all reunite, they're just together. And it's over, woo, we all lived. Versus in the book, Thufir, who isn't even in the part 2 movie, is still in the second half of the book. And he thinks Jessica is the one who betrayed them. Like, he still doesn't know who the true traitor was. So he's literally the whole second half of the book plotting, like, when I get my hands on her, I'm gonna kill her. I'm gonna get revenge for my Duke. And I think that's cool to see them all. I believe Gurney also thinks it was Jessica. Everybody kind of comes to the conclusion that it was probably Jessica after the event happens, when it was really Yue. I also think it's interesting that Chani is basically a nothing character in the book. Chani is literally down bad for Paul, like the moment she meets him. There is no having to earn his affection or earn her respect or trust. She is fully on board and agrees to basically everything he says. In fact, she even has his child in the book, which I was caught off guard after having seen the movie, because I was like, whoa, they had a kid? But yes, she even has his child. And her and Jessica actually have the closing moments of the book, where they're talking about after Paul goes off with the Erlin to have their arranged marriage. Her and Jessica talk about how, like, yeah, this marriage is political, but history will remember us. We're the true wives, we're the mothers of these children. So I think it's interesting to see that dynamic where she is so down bad for Paul versus Chani in the movie is hesitant of Paul, and she does fall for him, but she is not head over heels for him. Another moment from the book I really liked was Jamis' funeral. Jamis is the Fremen that Paul has to kill to kind of earn his place after him and his mother's place is challenged by Jamis. And in the movie, Jamis just kind of dies and we collect his water and it's over. Versus in the book, he has a whole funeral where everyone has to take something that belonged to him and say, like, Jamis taught me how to hunt and therefore I will take his knife. Stuff like that. And so in the book, Paul, if you remember, Jamis is Paul's first ever kill. And so Paul actually has a moment at Jamis' funeral where he does not want to go up, I killed this guy, but he has to. And he goes up there and he talks about how, Jamis taught me what it was like to take a life. That when you take a life, you feel that, you carry that burden with you forever. And so I thought it was a really cool scene. I liked it a lot. It gives a little more insight into Paul's innocence until he then goes down the path that he does. Speaking of Paul, his future vision, I feel like in the book, is played up more than the movie. He has unclear visions and they're not always certain, but he has them, I feel like, more often, or he expresses different thoughts he has. For example, with Gurney, Paul actually has a future vision of reuniting with Gurney. He sees a couple potential futures where he's like, maybe I will reunite with Gurney Halleck. Maybe I'll never see Gurney again. And so it was interesting to hear him seeing so many possible futures. Because, again, the movie doesn't have the time to talk about that. Versus, again, in the book, we're in his head. So we hear him thinking of, oh, I've seen the future where I meet Gurney. I've seen the future where I never meet Gurney again. And things like that. I do think Paul's downfall is a bit rushed in the book. Like, I think it happens really fast. Versus in the movie, it happens gradually over the two films. Versus here, Paul drinks the water of life without resistance. In the movie, it's played up of this is his last resort. He knows he has to drink it in order to win against the Emperor. Versus here, it's offered to him and he immediately bottoms up. Drinks that stuff. And now he's all-seeing and he's pretty, emotionless. And then the 2-year time skip is also pretty crazy in the book. Because, again, doesn't happen in the movie. In the book, we skip 2 years forward after Feyd-Rautha's gladiator fight that kind of ends, I believe, part 2 of the book. And in that 2-year time skip, Paul and Chani have a child who dies at the end of the book from the Harkonnens blowing up the siege. But I do feel like this 2-year time skip, I go back and forth on it. I feel like we miss a lot, but at the same time, I think it also helps to make more sense. In the movie, it's supposed to be a few weeks, a few months, and you're like, wow, Paul learned all that quickly? Versus in the book, you're like, yeah, he's been here 2 years. He knows how to do that. I think the sandworm riding sequence was really good in the book. It is almost exactly like it is in the movie, which I guess is technically flip-flopped. The movie correctly adapted it from the book. I also found Feyd-Rautha an interesting character, because we meet him at the beginning of the book. Unlike in the movie, we don't even meet him till halfway through part 2. And so, in the book, Feyd is introduced at the beginning, and honestly, Feyd isn't as crazy of a monster in the book as he is in the movie. He does kill people and things like that, but he's also, strategist. He plans. He literally sets up an assassination attempt on the Baron, which fails, because also in the book, that's not in the movie, is the Baron is like a pedophile, and it's gross, makes you uncomfortable. It's supposed to make you uncomfortable, it's supposed to make you not root for the Harkonnens. They are clearly the bad guys. But yeah, and so it was interesting to see Feyd kind of calm. For example, there's a sequence where he sits there with the Baron and Peter talking about their plan for the Atreides, versus I feel like movie Feyd-Rautha would have just gone, let's just kill them all, we don't need a plan. And so it was interesting to see him sit there so calmly. I also really like just the way the book is written, kind of bouncing back to that. It's almost... I also really like the way the book is written. I am not a fan of Shakespearean English and things like that. I find it confusing. And this book is kind of written like that. And so it is interesting. I guess maybe it's just the sci-fi of it that kept me interested. Because they do, sometimes have sequences where they're like, thy lady Jessica shall bow beforeth the largest maker in the world. And that's, talking about she's going to bow before the sandworm. Things like that. But it's written like Old English. But I just think it's a really fun book. It's a fascinating world. I am going to jump into Messiah next. I do want to continue to live in the world of Dune and continue to explore and know what happens to the Atreides now that Paul has taken over the Empire and Chani is his concubine and things like that. So yeah, overall, I would say net positive for Dune. I enjoyed the book a lot. I would say for me, personally, I think the first half of the book is more interesting than the second half, because I like the political intrigue, and like I said, going into everybody's head, and all of them trying to find, all of them doing their own research to try and find out who's the traitor. For example, in the book, Jessica has a moment where they get a note about the traitor, and it's the traitor is one of your war allies, or something along those lines. I don't remember the exact wording. But Jessica goes, oh, well, it can't be Yue. He's not a war ally. He's my friend. He's not an ally to the crown. And it's really? And so it is fascinating to go inside these characters' heads. I think the third-person omniscient point of view was the best way to do this. I don't think the book would have worked had it just been from Paul's point of view or just been from Jessica's. I think we truly do need to be able to go in and out of everybody's head. For example, when Paul and Feyd-Rautha fight at the end, you're going back and forth between them, where Paul is like, oh my goodness, Feyd is dodging every move I make. And then you've got Feyd, where it's just come here, if he'd just get a little closer, I could get him. And so I did truly enjoy this book. It makes sense why it's stuck around after 60 years. So, like I said, only beef with it was the format. It wasn't exactly the best, easiest read because of the format of the book I got. But I would probably read it again, honestly, sometime in the future. I also did some exploring with the audiobooks, and tested some of them out. Audiobooks are interesting. You can find some older audiobooks. That's what I did. Like, for example, I know the Amazon Prime version that's on Audible, people have been 50-50 on because it does abridge some scenes because it's almost formatted like an audio drama. If you want a totally unabridged version of the audiobook, I got my hands on an old copy of the audiobook online that is narrated by George Guidall. This was a Borders exclusive, if anybody remembers Borders. So yeah, you can find that like secondhand on eBay, stuff like that. Bouncing off the audiobook because it reminded me, I love Ireland's like intros to each chapter. Kind of gave her a presence in the story before she shows up, you know, because in the movie and in the book she's just there. You know, in the movie and the book they gave her a few scenes, but she really doesn't have any presence in the story until she shows up with her father on Arrakis. I was also surprised that Aaliyah is born in the book, because, again, in the movie, she's a sentient fetus that talks to her mother, versus here, she's an all-knowing toddler. And so I'm curious, I am so curious how this story continues. And so the world of Dune is great. I'm looking forward to reading Messiah, especially from what I've heard about it. Let me know what you think of Dune in the comments down below, whether you've seen the movie, read the book, or listen to the audiobook, anything. What is your experience with Dune? Let me know. If you liked what you saw here, I talk about nerdy stuff all the time. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you know when that next one's coming. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.